Camp Nightmare Fuel starts now. With Brian Barber from Bigfoot's Barbershop. Also with Barb Hartman from No Drama Bigfoot. And Lord Star Fox from Midnight Lycanthropy. Produced by Barb Hartman and Star Fox Radio.
Welcome to Camp Nightmare Fuel. The other camp counselors, Brian and Kenny, Lord Starfox, are safe in their bunks and protected.
I am able to, though, fortunately talk to Dr. Dennis Carroll. Dr. Carroll is going to tell us how to deal with some of these negative energies. One of the things he's going to talk about is the am I allowed to say that? Unalive vampires. Well, welcome, Dr. Carroll. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for being here. I've enjoyed several episodes of Camp Nightmare Fuel, and it's interesting. I like it. I like your format and all that, and you know me, I've been a big fan of your research for a long time here, so it's good to be here. Definitely, thank you for having me.
Of course, and the feeling is mutual. I mean, I'm not worthy. I mean, my gosh, you tell the viewers and the listeners a little bit about your history.
Okay, well, I go way back, way back, unfortunately. I'm a monster hunter from a long time ago. I was telling somebody the other day, I was a monster kid when I was a kid. I watched monster movies. I remember my second grade teacher getting on to me one day, doesn't this scare you, And I said, no, I love it. This is my forte here. I love it. I said, and I know it's not real. And as a kid, I'm gonna put this on my back of my next book I'm gonna come out with. As a kid, we think that monsters are real. Then we grow up to find out that they really are. And that's the interesting thing. But sometimes, unfortunately, as ex-law enforcement, I can tell you the monsters are us sometimes, definitely. But
Yes.
I have been involved and interested in this all my whole life. I had my first experience, paranormal type experience, when I was around 13 or 14 years old. I investigated the very first investigation I ever actually had or did was a werewolf sighting when I was 15 years old. So it's been a long haul for me, but it never gets old. It's somebody asked me the other day, aren't you ever going to retire? I said, I don't think so. It's just too darn interesting to let go of. And so it's become part of me. That's the way your research can do sometimes. It does become part of your very nature. But I look at all, Barbara, aspects of the paranormal and the supernatural. When I first started many years ago, that's the one thing I said, I want the whole pie. I don't want just one slice. So I went into every avenue of any kind of paranormal, supernatural, cryptid research. And that's what led me to where I am today. I've had a lot of my own experiences. I have encountered demons. I have encountered skinwalkers. I have hunted just about everything that's out there to hunt. I have had vampire cases, werewolves. I have had voodoo. The list goes on and on and on. And so I've got pretty much used to all of it. And it has been quite a ride up to now, definitely. And I know, here's the interesting thing, having had my own Bigfoot experience and having, I think, spotted dog man one night deep in the North Carolina woods. I I know these things exist without a doubt. I've seen the own proofs with my own
Mhm.
eyes of my
Right.
own experiences. Yeah.
Right.
And the one thing, Barbara, when this happens to you, and it does change your life, it changes
Mhm.
your perspective on things. The
Yeah.
one thing it did for me is like, it brought home a question. Since my very beginning that still haunts me to this day, this question still stays with me, I guess. It's kind of like my motto, and it's this. If this is real, whatever I'm seeing, Bigfoot, whatever the situation, if this is real, and I know it is, then my God, what else is out there? And all of my life has been trying to find out what else is out there.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes, I
Mm.
agree. Wow, that's a so much experience. I love it because I have to say that I've had a lot of those same experiences. And you're not, we were talking about this before the show. You're not trying to prove this to everybody, right? We're not here to prove it. We're here to just say, look, we've seen them with our own eyes, or we've experienced this, or we've heard this.
Mhm.
And to us, our truth is that it's real. And we want people to protect themselves.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100% on that because our experiences are the proof enough for us. Okay. And we should, it's not our job to go around trying to prove to other, but we can share our evidence with other people. There's nothing wrong with that. If somebody
Yeah,
comes up to what happened to you, I want to hear your experience. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But it's not our main part of our job to
right.
go around trying to convince or prove anything,
Mm-hmm.
especially the very nature of what we're dealing with is so very darn hard to prove. That's the
That's
thing
right.
about it. And somebody once asked, a woman once was asked me, says, you could get the paranormal to perform for you. I said, well, if I could do that, I'd be a very rich person. I would know exactly what I was, wanted to have on file as evidence. But it don't work that way,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And I was telling somebody this the other day. You can read about things and till the cows come home. You can read about it, you can research it that way. I call them armchair researchers, and you got to do a lot of that too, as
Yeah.
an investigative researcher.
Mhm. Yes. Hmm.
But the best thing of all, I don't care how many degrees you come up with, how much certificates you want to give me, whatever that. The best thing of all is experience. That's what in the field experience is the
Hmm.
greatest teacher of all. And the more you've got of that, the more I consider you a very serious researcher. You're not just,
Hmm.
playing around with things. That's it. And unfortunately, Barbara, especially with social media and all that we've got nowadays with this social
Hmm.
media, you can read, people think they read a book and they instantly become an expert,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
know, and that bugs you. I know it bugs you, it bugs me, it bugs everybody in this thing, but that's just the nature of people. A lot of times we have to understand that. But they're always asking you, where's your proof? Where's your proof? Where's your proof? And so I'm not caught up on proving because I know. You know what you've had
Yes.
happen to you. I know what I've had happen to me. And I
Hmm.
don't feel that great of a responsibility to prove it.
No, right, right.
Yeah, I mean, I've often said, I know what I know what I know. I know that.
Hmm.
Okay. And that's the way I kind of look at it. Uh, but that's what great shows like this, like your shows, is really good about. It's about that we can get together and talk about these things, share our evidence, share our experiences. The more knowledge we interchange, the better off we are for any of this kind of stuff. And that's another thing I don't like about some people. They got their evidence or whatever, they hold it right here. Oh, I don't want to share it with
No, yes.
you. That's
Hmm.
my stuff. You're gonna steal my stuff.
Yeah.
That's not a good attitude to have. That's not good.
Yeah, yeah. It's that and I don't have that because I feel like, I don't know. It's, I don't have I'm not saying I want anybody to steal my evidence, but I'm not that worried about it. I feel like it's more my responsibility just to get it out there. Okay.
Mm.
But, then why do people have to steal evidence? Because it's just so dumb. But there we go. Back to what you said. We are the monsters. sometimes,
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes things that we've experienced, the evidence that we have, whether it be recordings or just eyewitness sounds or
Mhm.
whatever the situation is, definitely. But we got to understand other people have had those same experiences. They have the same research that we do. So they're not likely to steal it in that sense of the word
Mhm.
unless they come up and try to claim something that's theirs that that you can't. How you gonna copyright Bigfoot? You know what I'm saying?
Right, right. That's
Uh,
true. Yeah, yeah,
that's not gonna work.
yeah.
But people, a lot of times, Barbara, you got to understand, people are correlating your research too. They're going down the same avenue. You may be on the West Coast, I may be on the East Coast, and we may be
Mhm,
going down the same path
mhm,
many
mhm, mhm.
times. That's going
Yes.
to happen. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that because that's the nature also of our research and what we're
Mhm.
doing. There's only certain there's only certain ways you can monster hunt. There's only certain ways you can go look for Bigfoot out in the woods. One of them, I had a lot of people come up over the years and said, "God, Dennis, you sure have had a lot of experiences. You've met a lot and saw a lot of things I wish I could have seen. How did you do that?" I said, "I don't know. I guess you'll find it because you're looking for it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, you got to go look for it,
Yeah.
to find it." And a lot of people say, "Well, yeah, I should have been looking for that." That's part of my problems. But that's the research part of it, definitely. And I like to call it investigative research because
Mhm.
there's two kinds of research. Like I said, there's an armchair research. You're just kind of skimming it, you're
Mhm.
skimming over that. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's good.
Mhm.
That's the way it
Right.
begins.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Mhm.
But then you've got investigative research. That goes deep. That means you sitting out in the woods on a log for the next 10 hours doing something. You know what I'm saying? That's real investigative research there.
Yes.
And a
Yeah.
lot of people, and when I used to do a lot of spiritual research or ghost hunting, it's like, I don't have to call it ghost hunting, I call it
Mhm.
spiritual research. When I used to do that, I used to be sitting in a dark room for like 6 hours waiting for something to
Oh.
happen. And I'm thinking, nobody's going to watch this on TV. They don't want to
Yeah.
watch that part. They don't want to see the boring part of that research that you got to go do.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
they don't understand a lot of times. They only want to see the result, Barbara. They want to
Mhm.
see the
Mhm.
results, and they don't want to understand how I got there.
Right.
Yeah.
Dr. Carroll, I want to mention this makes me perfect example. You're friends with Carroll Fountain, right? From Midwest Nightwatch. And
Mhm.
I was on their show, maybe a month, 6 weeks ago. And one of the viewers said, I like Barb Hartman and her research, but the problem is I don't understand how she can find Sasquatch in all of her videos. And I'm like,
Well,
well, I'm not going to play a lot of the parts where he's not there, where they're not there, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, they don't. A lot of people don't understand, Barb, that how you're getting to that area of research and
mhm,
how you're doing it. They don't understand your methods. Your methods may be different than mine.
yeah, right.
I'm one. When it comes to Dog Man and Bigfoot, I'd rather ambush them in a way. Okay, but
Oh, do you? No, not me. No.
some people take a different tack at it. You know
Yeah,
what I'm saying?
yeah,
Some people go there. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. We need
yeah.
that. We need diversity in this stuff. Okay,
Mhm,
absolutely. But a lot of people don't understand, how you're doing that and all that, and how your methods are and what you do. You may be trying to interact with what's out there, and I like that. I love that part of your research. You're out there. You're trying to gift these things. You're trying to
mhm.
interact or get some kind
Yes,
of interaction going. There's
yes.
nothing wrong with that. That's valuable research. Okay, but some people may not do that. Some people may be. And here's one thing I'm gonna say something really bugs me about this, and people don't understand this either. There's a right way and a wrong way to look for things. If you're gonna monster hunt, do it right, okay? Because you're just wasting valuable time if you do it wrong. And
Mhm.
you and let me say this, just like you. Now I know you like to get in your woods. You got these Bigfoot very close to where you're at, and all this that you're doing, got you got going on. You gotta remember that you stay a lot in the woods. I know you spend a lot of time out there, definitely to do the things you do. You got to.
Yeah.
I have known some people that have actually had them in their backyards, and I've investigated some places like that, almost their backyards. The wood
That's
line
how I
come up
am.
to their
That's how it
backyard.
is with
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
Yeah, that's how it is with me. Yeah.
Well, that's
But it,
handy to have your research area
yes, it
close
is.
by.
It is.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's
That's
perfect.
true. But I
Um,
do go out into the. I like to go out into the woods though
yeah.
too, because
And
kind of
when
to
you
try to observe them in their,
mhm,
in their environment. So, but I didn't mean to interrupt. So
yeah.
go ahead.
No, no, but that's good that you can have your research area that close. That gives you more opportunity to really live your research. You know what I'm saying? And
Yes.
that's the best kind of all, to live it to a certain extent. But a lot of people don't understand this, and they don't understand how we do it. But that's okay. That's just they're trying to understand, I guess. But yeah,
Yeah.
and the different methods and different ways to go about things and look at things. The way you look at it may not be exactly the way I look at it, but
Right.
it's good that we can reconcile that together.
Right.
That's what true research is all about.
And there's no
And
wrong opinion.
investigation. That's the other part of it.
Oh, yes.
Investigation is part of research. They go together. They're married, I say. They're very close together because that's what investigation is all about. You've got to investigate. You've got to proactively look into these things and not just, not when it's one thing to travel the rabbit holes. It's
Hmm.
another thing to live in them, which I
Yeah.
basically do. And yeah, I
Yes.
think you do too. We live in those rabbit holes a lot. But you got to do that to understand, to really understand and get close to whatever subject may be. And like I was telling you earlier, I've seen Bigfoot face to face. I mean, I was close enough. We made eye contact. I was close enough but that it took me a good many years to get to that point. I saw him many times from a distance, and it made me want to see more and more and more of it. To really get that clear look that I wanted, and by gosh, I got it finally. And it was fantastic when it happened. And I had a lot of people over the years ask me, they said, um, weren't you scared? Didn't you want to run? I said, yeah, I wanted to run to him. I wanted to see more. I didn't get to see enough. I
Really?
wanted to see more. And it was very strange because he walked right up on me, and it was it was very dark, but I was looking at him through a night scope vision.
Mm.
But he had, and I'll never will forget when we made eye contact. He walked up and said, "Oh," he had a surprised look on his face. He's like,
Wow.
"Oh, you see me?" and
Oh
I
my
guess
God.
I probably had the same look.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and we kind of made eye contact for a minute, and then and here's the weird thing about it, and I've talked about this over the years many times. I was told Vic Condas about this. I've told many times I've related this. I was close enough to reach out and touch him. I could see his hair. I could see him. And here's another thing about this. A lot of people don't get this. You can back me up on this, I know. They don't look that much like apes to me. They have an ape look. They got a little bit of an ape look thing going on, but you see the Bigfoot depicted a lot of times as looking like a gorilla or something.
Mhm.
He didn't. This one didn't look like that to me,
Mhm.
and he had hair almost as long as you do coming off his head, like your hair,
Mhm.
and yet he had hair on his face. He had and the hair started up around the eyes, not like a man would, further down. His eyes kind of started that way. He had hair on it, and he was nice looking guy to me.
Yeah.
He wasn't that scary. You know what I'm saying? But it was the weird feeling, the vibes I got off of him were not. I'm not gonna say that we're happy. I'm gonna tell you this about Bigfoot. Okay, a lot of people I think have got a misconception about him. I think he's not. Well, he's not a gentle giant running through the forest playing with butterflies and picking daisies. I don't feel that at all. He's got a dark survivalist side to him. He's gonna, I think, and you can't blame him because this is the rules. I was talking about this the other night on a podcast. If you're gonna survive in this world, you can't have any rules. And to that extent, you know what I mean? I mean, everything's off the table. You do what you gotta do. That's like people that get mad. Oh, that mean darn coyote ate my cat. Well, the problem is you should have been watching your cat mainly. You can't blame the coyote. He's just trying to live, make a living. Okay, he's just trying to do what it takes to survive, and that means anything that you got to do. You know, if the lights go out tomorrow, Barbara, and never come back on again, you're going to wake up tomorrow to a completely different world.
Oh, that's for sure.
And it's
Oh,
going to be
boy.
a world like that, a world of savagery that you're going to have to do whatever it takes to make you and your family survive.
Right.
And that means, if it means cutting somebody's throat with a piece of bread, I don't want to get on this dark of a subject, but I mean, that's the way it goes.
That's
You do
true.
what it takes to survive. And so I don't see him being the gentle forest giant kind of a thing. That's trying to humanize him. And he's not human. He's not human like you and I are in that extent. We tend to do that with everything. We do that with our dogs. We do that with our birds. We humanize everything. And because we're trying to see things, unfortunately, through a human filter. Just like we're going to talk in a few minutes about Hollywood filters. You don't want to look through the human filter too much because it can screw your research up too. You're being biased, see, and you don't need to be that biased about these things. You got to be. When I see stuff like this, and I'm gonna shut up here for you a minute, but when I see stuff like this, I envision in my mind a set of scales. Okay, when it comes to research, that set of scales is always in my mind, and I weigh it against other factors and wait and see how it goes up or down, and that's what you got to do, okay, when it comes to research. But when you have your own personal experience, it changes the very scales that you weigh stuff on. I understand that. But you got to be careful as a scientific investigative researcher as much as possible to be as unbiased and walk that fine line between what you want to believe and what's really there. You got to be careful. I have so many people say, "Oh, look at this shadow. That's Bigfoot transforming." They're seeing things sometimes. I say, they get mad at me for this, okay? But you're seeing things sometimes that ain't really there. You're seeing what you want to be there. I don't want to see what I want to be there. I want to see what's really there. Whatever it may be.
Yes. Do you think, Dr. Carroll, that some people have more of an ability to see things of a supernatural kind of nature like that?
We have to be, and I'm not just talking about being open-minded. Unfortunately, Barbara, some people are so open-minded, their brains fall out.
Yeah.
We don't want to do that either.
That explains it.
Be careful. Yeah, you got to be careful. You have to be open-minded, but I think you have to be spiritually open in some ways too to these things, and you definitely have to be open to the very core of your being to some of this stuff and understand what it is you're searching for, whatever it is. In order to be a good, true monster hunter, you have to get in touch with that inner being wanting to know. Like the things that I've seen makes me want to see more of them and experience more of it. That's what drives. I call it lighting a fire under you. That's what it's doing, and you use that. You use that motivation. A lot of times I've been sitting out in the middle of the forest, in the middle of a rainstorm, freezing to death, wondering, hey, what the heck am I doing here? Why am I doing? I could be home, watching TVs and eating potato chips. What am I doing here? And all of a sudden, you say, well, because I got to know. Yeah, I'm here because I got to know, or I got to do this. This is just being driven to do this. And if we don't get in touch with that, then we are not going to be very valuable researchers to anyone or our own selves, for that matter. We've got to get in touch with that too. You got to want to go. You got to want to haul it, But like I said a moment ago, there's a right way and a wrong way to do things. And of course, people have different methods, and I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about there are something. It's like, let me say this right quick. If I go walking through the forest looking for Bigfoot or Dogman, I want to say this. Okay, I'm walking down. There's one thing about it. You can go look all day long for scant. You can look for hair. You can look for tracks. That's fine. That's part of monster hunting. Right there. We call it tracking. Okay. That's part of tracking. That's very important. I'm not talking about that. If you just start meandering around through the woods all the time looking for Bigfoot, I'm sorry to tell you this, you're probably not going to find him. You'll be incredibly lucky if you walk up on him because he knows you're there. from way, way back down the trail. He knows from miles back where you're at. I'm gonna tell you what, for him and other cryptids like him to really survive, they are got and have to be supernaturally sensitive in many ways. Okay, and the
Yes.
Bigfoot like I saw that was just there one minute and gone the next. He was stuck behind a tree, and I have not seen him since. I don't know where he went. There was no way, because I was standing there looking for him, that he could have gotten away that I can really explain to you. It had to be something like, I don't know, spiritual thing going on
Hmm.
or portal or something. It had to be something like that. I looked up in the tree. I looked for a hole. There was
Yeah.
no way down through that forest she could have moved without me seeing him.
Hmm.
Where did he go? That's the question I was left with. What the heck happened here?
Right. Oh, I'm going to
Yeah,
bring in
and I've been, yeah,
Brian Barber.
investigating that ever since. Hey, how you doing?
Good, Dr.
Brian,
Carroll.
I have told the audience that we have a little bit of a different format because there's some negative energy in the air tonight around Camp Nightmare Fuel, even worse than usual. So we're all kind of hunkered back in our bunks, right? Instead of doing it in the middle of the forest around the campfire. So Dr. Carroll is just, oh my gosh, sharing such amazing information and some good tips on research too. So you can continue, Dr. Carroll.
Well, yeah, I was just gonna say that you're meandering down through the woods, you're stomping through the woods. Some people are there smoking a cigarette, or they got enough cologne on 'em to stop a battleship. You're walking through there, you got to hunt Bigfoot just like you would deer hunt. And I've done a lot of deer hunting in my day. Okay, I've done a lot of hunting, and you got to use those same techniques. But my favorite thing to do is to find you a good place off the trail. And believe me, a lot of times he's back there trailing you and you don't know it. Okay. Let me say something about Bigfoot. It's very much like a mountain lion. Mountain lion has territory. Bigfoot has territory. He's very territorial, I think, in many ways. Okay. He has a territory. He knows when you come in his territory. He knows it without doubt. Because, like I said, this guy's super sensitive. Okay. He's picking up on it. I think he even feels you, psychically almost, that you're there. Okay. When you go into his territory, he's gonna watch you. He's gonna start watching you. He's probably back behind you, trailing you. There's been a lot of times I've stopped and went off the trail and just sit back, and I have actually seen him from a distance back there trailing me. Okay. He was doing that because that's the smart way. He probably learned that from indigenous people because that's the way they used to operate. Okay. So anyway, that's another thing you do. But keep walking down through the woods, looking around. You're just wasting your time. What you need to do is to sort of bushwhack him. You got to kind of go look and wait for him to kind of show up you find that squatchy area where you found the signs and the footprints and all. That's where you need to stake it out, just like the cops. I was a cop for a long time. You got to stake stuff out like that, okay? If you really want to catch it, but you got to be in the good place to do it. And I've had a lot of people say, "Oh, where do I need to look for Bigfoot?" I said, "Wherever you think he may have been. That's where you go to look, okay? Or where it's been reported or other people have seen them. That's where you need to go because that's where you may have a more chance about it." But let me tell you something about Bigfoot being very much like the mountain lion. I had an old tracker tell me one time, when you talk about mountain lions, and I run into mountain lions, okay? He said, when you see the mountain lion, it's already too late. The mountain lion, when you walk in his territory, he begins to track you, he begins to circle you around, and the circle gets smaller and smaller and smaller until he confronts you most of the time. That's when things are going to get interesting, okay? Bigfoot does that too, to a certain extent. Not quite exactly the same way, but he's still doing that. You're in his territory. He's circling you sometimes or backtracking you. But he's there watching you intently. And they watch and learn a lot of things from us, too. They're smart. In order to survive like that, you got to be smart. And you got to be very open to learning and adapting yourself. And that's exactly what this guy knows how to do. Okay. And a lot of times we devalue him when we shouldn't, because he's a whole lot smarter than people realize. And that's what your quarry is. And if you don't understand that, then you're not going to be a good hunter. You're not going to really hit the mark when you need to. So that's to me, has always been the prime way that I have a look for this guy. And it's panned out for me. It works. And that's what I tell people about everything. If I'm not going to tell you about something that don't work, and to me, if it works, it's been tried and true. And that's what I want to deal with, and not waste time on things that may not work. But that's the one way to do it. But you got to proactively look for the perfect place to make that encounter happen a lot of times, or that is out there. And yeah, sure, if you hear him hollering, or if you hear some whoops out there, and a lot of people are fixated on a tree bashing, hitting the trees. That happens. I've heard it, but that's not just part of it. You can't judge a lot of things by that, because I have heard other things that can make that noise too. Okay, you can't base your whole research on just the noise. Or just something. You got to assemble all the clues and the patterns that's there. That's what you got to look for. But you hunt all monsters this way, not just Bigfoot. If I hear of a dogman sighting or a werewolf sighting, that's the way I got to approach it. I talk about that in my book, the first book I wrote, Beyond the Shadows, a field guide to paranormal investigation. There are certain things, certain ways you do, and you got to look upon these places as if they were experimental rooms or something. This is where your experiment taking place, and the number one rule of experimentation is to keep out as much outside interference as possible from what you're trying to look at. And that includes how you put your own self into that environment. Okay? And if you sit down for a few hours out there in the woods, Bigfoot then begins to realize, hey, you're not out there to shoot him. You're not out there to unalive him or whatever it is. You're not a threat in a lot of ways. You're becoming part of the environment that belongs to him. He begins to accept you a little bit. You understand? That's what you want. You want that acceptability. You want to blend in a little bit. You want to show you're not a threat. When you start going through the woods with a big sawed-off shotgun, walking down there, sticking the. If I see you looking for me like that, I'm definitely gonna hide.
Right.
Can you blame him?
Yeah. No. And they haven't. They have great methods of camouflaging and keeping themselves hidden.
Oh yeah. Well, I believe they've got built-in natural camouflage, and that's part of their survival adaptation. I believe this thing. It's a wonderful thing about nature and the animals that we see and all that. How they adapt. We adapt. We are very good at that. That's the way our Creator made us.
Yes.
We can adapt, and that's part of our. I'd say that some of the arrows in our quiver. Okay, that we can adapt to things. That's good. And yes, definitely he's adapting. And we got to remember something about Bigfoot, other cryptids like that. Their environment is constantly changing. They've got to change constantly and adapt with that change in many ways, especially when it comes to dealing with us.
Yes. Before we move on alive vampires, Brian, do you have any questions for Dr. Carroll?
Well, he just hit on something I had never given consideration to. The fact that, I'm out in the woods and I'm walking around for, 3-4 hours when I could have maybe walked for an hour, sat down for 2 or 3, and maybe even de-escalated that threat level to the point where maybe I would have had a better chance.
Yeah.
But yeah. There comes a time, definitely you can walk through and look for clues. I even look for misplaced acorns and stuff like that shouldn't be there. You can. He is very subtle many times in his signs. He's smart. He knows what he's doing. You can look for these things, but there comes a point where you got to stop looking and stick him up and watch for him and be, and become part of his environment. That's the main thing. And that will make you more of a supreme hunter in many ways in that. But a lot of time, unfortunately, is wasted on too much walking through there, looking around because he's watching you. He knows you're there,
Yeah.
and you're preventing yourself from having an experience that you might be having if you're not careful. You don't want to do that.
I had never considered that, and now I'm going to be putting a foldable chair in my backpack just so I can.
Tom Cantrell says that too. He said the way that he likes to experience them, and he says this all the time. He said you get a folding chair, and you get he said he would get a cooler of like fried chicken and a 6-pack of Diet Coke, and just sit there and let them come out.
That sounds like my kind of Bigfooting.
I think the number one thing that he is looking at is trying to determine if we're a real threat to him too. He's a survivalist. Okay, he's thinking about like I was saying earlier, Barb. I was saying this. He's not that gentle forest giant running through the forest, playing with butterflies, petting the deer. If he's got a deer, he's tearing that deer open and eating it. Okay, I mean that's just what it's taking for him to survive. He's going to do what it takes. There is that kind of dark side to him in that respect, but you gotta respect that because that's what you gotta do. Well, you gotta do what he's gotta do. Like John Wayne says, a man's gotta do what a man's gotta do. Bigfoot gotta do what Bigfoot gotta do. Okay,
right.
And
he just does it bigger.
Here's the thing about it. We, like I said, we got to be careful and quit dehumanizing him. We got to quit thinking. We think he's acting like us, and he's not. And unless you determine how he's acting, what he's doing, you're not going to be successful in it. So we've got to put the human filter away and try to see things as they are. And that's the number one thing as a hunter you got to do. But yeah, when he finally determines, I think, that you're not a threat, and the only way I'm ever going to shoot Bigfoot is going to be either a case of my survival, or it's going to be with a camera. I'm going to shoot him with a camera. That's why I want to shoot him. Like I said, that's when I saw him face to face, Barbara. The number one thing that hit home, this guy is very much human. I could not put him in the crosshairs and pull a trigger on him.
Oh, no, that's the one that I saw too. Absolutely not. It was like, whoa.
But, yeah. I mean, I know I would love to bring him back. And if it was dead, but I don't want to be the cause of that. You understand? If I find him dead out there, that's good. I'll bring him back. Something, yeah, but I don't want to be the cause. I would not want to be the cause of that. But I would like to bring him back alive. That would be the little one thing. That would come on back with me. We'll go to Walmart or something,
But then what happens? And then because then what happens? I can't really. What does it look like with what would their life look like if we're like, okay, they're accepted part of citizens? What I mean, do we?
Yeah,
I hate to put them on reservations. Like, is that what the government would do? Because they're and I hate to see anything like that. It concerns me. What if we do prove? Oh, here's some, and I'm sure that they know.
And, that's the funny thing. I was just thinking. We mentioned earlier we tend to humanize things, even our pets. But then when it comes to humans, we tend to dehumanize humans. Yeah. Okay? That's just the way we work. And unfortunately, that's bad too. You dehumanize the humans because they're human beings. But Bigfoot, Dogman, these things, they're not human. We must always understand that. And we've got to make accommodations for that in our research and how we look at these things and remain as unbiased as possible in what we're doing. Like I said, I might want to believe he's from outer space. I might want to believe that, but I can't let that shade my research.
Mm-hmm.
I can't, I can come from there, but I can't let it overhaul everything. Right. That's not good. And just because you believe something and you're trying to prove a point, maybe you can't let it overwhelm what you're doing in your research, because then your research becomes untrustworthy and biased. And when that happens, then it becomes unessential in the way that you have done it. And that's not good either. And that is working against your research. And here's one more thing we've got to always keep in mind. And I know this sounds superficial, but our investigation also a lot of time hinges on our reputation as investigators. Okay, if you're out there doing wacky things, people are not going to take you seriously. Okay, because you believe something and you're trying to prove a point, maybe you can't let it overwhelm what you're doing in your research, because then your research becomes untrustworthy and biased. And when that happens, then it becomes unessential for your own reputation, and let it speak for itself and show that you really are doing what you want to do and the right way, and that you're smart enough to do it the right way. Then people pay more attention to you and say, well, they may believe more of what you're doing, but your research becomes much more valuable.
Mm-hmm.
That's the main point.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's switch gears and let's talk about the undead vampires.
All right. Well, I have had, as a monster, like I said earlier in the show, I've hunted everything just about out there. I've had several vampire cases. I was relating one the other night. I goes, several years back, I had a young lady come to me who was very distraught and upset. She had seen me on television or something, and she wanted to meet with me at a restaurant nearby. So I did. She contacted me. I met with her. She's very nice. She's probably, I would say, in her early mid-20s, something like that. And she was very distraught, though. She was very upset. And she said, here's my story. She said, my mother just recently died, and my mother came to live with me. She had terminal cancer. She had like 3 months to live, and said she came to live with me, and I'm her only child. She said, but here's the interesting thing. My mother and I never got along. My mother was a mean, cold, narcissistic person. She was controlling, manipulative, downright almost diabolical. She was just mean, evil. That was her mother. She said, I hate to say that about my mother, but that's what she was. And she said, I love my mother, but yet in some ways I hated her because of this. Because of the way, and she was very cold and vindictive. Had been this way my whole life almost, you know. And her father had divorced her father many years before, I think, And she said, but my mother, when she found out she was dying, she wanted to come stay with me. She hated the world now and everything in it. This woman was very vindictive about it. And said her mother had requested one thing. She said, no matter what you do for me, bury me in this dress. She had a very favorite dress, and it was sort of like a white satin kind of dress, almost like a wedding dress in some ways, but it wasn't. It was just her favorite dress. She said, I want to be buried in this dress. She said, sure, Mom, I do whatever you want to do. She hated the world now and everything in it. This woman was very vindictive about it. And said her mother had requested one thing. She said, no matter what, buried in an above ground vault, mausoleum. And she said that the night of her funeral, after, she was buried, is when she first came to me in my dream. Said, my mother has been coming to me for the last week or so every night in my dreams. And she's not acting like my mother. She's like putting her arm around me and nuzzling me and holding me and putting her head on my neck, on my shoulder, trying to kiss me on the neck. And just said, my mother never did anything like that. And she said, Dr. Carroll, this is not my mother. The woman I knew in this dream is not her. And she's wearing that white satin dress that she was buried in. Okay. And in this dream, she said, it is so vivid that it gives me chills right now. I'm telling you about it. That's what she said. And then when I wake up in the morning, I'm just drained. I said, I'm just like I didn't sleep at all. Like I've been running a race in my sleep or something. I'm just drained. And she said, honest to God, I don't know what's going on here, but it's affecting me badly. It's messing me up. It said it's giving me headaches. It's doing a lot of stuff to me. And I said, well, this does not sound good. This does not sound good at all. And I said, it sounds very much like we're dealing with something of a vampire type nature, without a doubt. I said, well, here's what I'm going to do for you. I said, I'm going to go to that and stake out this cemetery for the next 7 nights to see if anything happens around your mother's vault. I'm going to check it out for you and see what's going on. And the girl told me one other thing I forgot to tell you. She said, I found a piece of cloth on my floor the other day that looked like it come off that dress. I have that here somewhere. She gave it to me.
Oh,
And
that's
said,
so
take
cute.
it. I don't want it in my house. But said, this looked like it come off of that dress. I don't know where this piece of cloth come from. It looked like it was torn off of them.
Mhm.
Like you would catch an edge on something, on the dress, and it would.
Okay. Mhm.
That was sort of the censure. That was the, icing on the cake for me. Hey, this, is not only, it's coming out of the spiritual type realm into the physical realm in some ways. Okay. So anyway, for the next 7 long, dark nights, I sat out in that cemetery watching this mausoleum. About the 3rd night, I'm sitting out there and I see something white moving out among the tombstone in the graveyard. I said, "Uh-oh, this is not good. What's going on here?" So I get the flashlight and I walk out there. Now, I was a policeman at that time. I'm retired now. So I had permission to be there, but I was still kind of watching from the outside of the cemetery because I could see the mausoleum, where it was at and everything, and where my vantage point was, I could see all the way around it, which is what I wanted to do. And so because it is basically against the law to be in the cemetery after sundown in most places, you don't do that without permission. I've been a lot of nights in cemeteries, so I know how that goes. But anyway, um. I see this white figure moving. I said, "Uh-oh, I got to go check this out. What is this? And my first thought was, this woman in the white dress walking around out here in the cemetery. So I'm walking around looking and come up on it, and it's a great big white dog.
Oh my gosh.
And it's sitting there looking at me. Now I'm an animal person. Dogs usually come up to me. They like me, because I've had a dog, and they like me. They know what I mean. But this dog acted kind of strange. I'm gonna go back to that in a minute. He kind of acted kind of strange though. He kind of just sat there watching me. He didn't come up. I spoke to him. I said, "Come here, boy." He didn't do it. He didn't move. He just sat there and kind of looking at me. Kind of cocking his head at me, looking at like, "What are you doing here?" Kind of thing. And so I said, "This is weird. This is real freaky." So finally, the dog got up and walked off. He just turned over and walked on out of the cemetery. And I said, "Well, I don't know if this is related or not." Okay. But I go back to the car and I keep watching, but nothing else happens. So at that end of the period, I meet the woman again and I tell her, I said, I staked your mother's thing out. Nothing happened. I didn't see anything. I told her about the dog. I said, I have to wonder if that was a real dog. Okay. I don't know about that. I really can't tell you for sure. But anyway, I told her what happened and everything. And she said, well, the dreams are getting worse. That I went to the doctor and he said, there's nothing wrong with me. He couldn't find anything wrong. I'm not anemic. There's nothing going on there. And but he said, I'm getting worse. I said, we got to do something. This is driving me crazy. I said, well, there's one more thing I can do I know that I can do for you, except having your mother exhumed. And I said, I have a piece of blessed chalk. I always keep in my kit, and I do a lot of spiritual cleansings. I have done thousands of some people call spiritual blessings or cleansings on places. I've done thousands of them over the years, and I had a piece of consecrated chalk, and I went into the mausoleum, and I put a cross on it. I didn't want to deface the grave, but on the outside, I do a cross. I put a cross, I mark a cross on it. I say a prayer, I anoint it, and then I speak to this woman. I say, look, whoever or whatever you are, and I call her by name. I said, you don't belong here anymore. Your daughter doesn't need you here anymore. There's no place for you in this world anymore. You need to go on to where you need to go. You need to leave and not bother anyone ever again. Don't come back. I seal this place with this cross. I seal this place with this prayer. I did the Lord's Prayer over it and all the other things, everything need to be done. I anointed it. I salted that mausoleum, and I left it. Met with a woman the next day, and she comes in with she's a different person. And she comes in, she said, "What have you done?" And I said, "Well, I told you what I was going to do. That's what I did, you know." She said, "Well, whatever you did, I slept through last night, the first time I've slept in 2 weeks since my mother died.
Wow.
Without a problem, you know. What did you do?" I said, "Well, we did what needed to be done." And last time I heard, you had no more problems with that. Hopefully, that ended that for good. But that was definitely what I would term some type of a vampire type spirit.
Wow.
And these things can be definitely the undead. In other words, she was not resting. She was not doing what she needed to do as a spirit. She was coming back to haunt the living. That is what the undead usually do in many different ways. I've had a lot of cases like that over the years, and here's the interesting thing about vampires, and we'll get on to other undead. There's more than just vampires than there's the undead out there, definitely. But the thing about the vampire is it can be one of the most diabolical and most dangerous things you can run into for the very simple fact is they're just too much like us in many ways. They think like we do and can be like us. But there are two main kind of vampires, and I'm not talking about human vampires. Human vampires are people that want to be vampires. They get their teeth fixed. They live in some vampire societies and they do all these things. They're goth and they want to live the vampire lifestyle. Okay. That's a human vampire. Okay. And they're very much influenced by Hollywood, which they see everything through that Hollywood filter we've talked about. We've got to throw Hollywood out the door here because Hollywood has made us see things differently through the wrong kind of a filter here when it comes to this, especially the way these things are based in folklore. But there are two main kind of vampires that I have dealt with and people deal with. Although there may be other little subcategories, I'm not going to get into that tonight. But the two main vampires are the one kind that is spiritual, they are spirit beings, and the other kind is that they are reanimated corpses. Okay, they are walking dead people. But let me just say, Barbara, if you were to come back as a vampire, okay, you would not be Barb. You're not me, Barbara. You would be something else. You're not Barbara. You're a vampire. Meaning you have a vampire spirit in you that has reanimated your body and is using it like a taxi. Okay. Or Uber or something. Okay. That's the way it's doing you. And you have been reanimated. We call that demonic reanimation of the dead. And that can be done via different ways. Okay. But that's what's happening. But then you have the other kind of vampire, which is a spiritual entity. I've run into them too, and they can be just as deadly as the other kind as well. And they're more prevalent than the kind that's the reanimated corpse. Kind that's walking around. And that's very much like a zombie. We're going to talk about zombies in a few minutes. And they're not what people think they are. Okay, we've had Hollywood screw us up on that too. But that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with diabolical, demonic type spirits here. Many cases, that's what's going on. Because if I were to come back as a vampire, I would not be Dennis. Okay, I would be another entity altogether. Dennis is going on somewhere else, although he may be using my body or my form or my shape, or even it can be used. Here's the weird thing about it: the inhabitation of this thing. It can use I would say your leftover memories that it has. Once it's sort of reading you through what was once in your body, and it can act like you and even talk like you. I've had mimics do that. I had a mimic do that to me one time. It hollered at me from some bushes out in the middle of the woods with my voice.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, these things can do that. Well, they can do a whole lot of things that blows people's minds. The things that they can do. And I've run into these demonic spirits many times in the way that they operate, but they can do this. And here's the thing: most of the time, they're not running around like Hollywood wants things sucking your blood out. they're really sucking the essence of your soul out. They're really living off of your life essence most of the time. Although they can do that with the blood. Let me say something about the blood thing. The blood factor is the demonic. The demonic has a love affair with blood, human blood, by the way. Okay, and I don't want to get you shadow land here. Okay, so I got to be very careful with this next subject we're dealing with here. There's something about human blood that fulfills their black magic attributes and fuels their power. And the use of that blood, and the very innocent blood that has been infused with fear, is like a narcotic to these things. They want to have it, and they'll do anything, whatever it takes to get that in many aspects. Just like a crackhead, they'll do whatever it takes to get the drugs that they need. That's what happens with this. But I have seen demonic spirits do things. I had a case when I was a policeman, ex-policeman. I'm ex-policeman now, but back when I was a policeman, we had a woman that on meth actually clawed her eyes out. Her own eyes out. She is alive to this day with no eyes. She can't see, but she is thankfully off of drugs now. But what a terrible price to pay for that, But that's just the way the demonic spirits work. They can do that when they inhabit people and do them. Sure, they can make them thirst for blood. Sure, they can do things like that. So that's the other kind of vampire, the spirit that can actually inhabit living people and turn them into these things. And you can have this and you can obtain this power through dark diabolical means. You can be in a coven or a cult of witchcraft or satanic cult. And there are cults of vampires. There are cults of werewolves. Yes, werewolves are real. This whole thing is done. But this is a demonic power that you can acquire to become these things. And in order to do that, and there's one thing about folklore. A lot of times they used to think you had to be either one of the most downright evil people, like that woman we were talking about earlier. Mean and evil, you're going to probably come back as a vampire. Or suicide, or if you certain things you could do in folklore that says, hey, you might come back as a vampire that way. That's the spiritual aspect of these things. So you've got to understand that's the animal you're dealing with when it comes to the vampire. He can come at you in different ways, and this one makes it so downright dangerous. You better know if you're going to hunt vampires, you better know how to hunt vampires, and you better understand what their natures are and how they operate and what they can do to you and do to other people. That's the way they do things. You got to know your quarry and what you're hunting. I've had a lot of experiences with vampire type spirits that attack people this way. And we were talking earlier about spiritual attack. And yes, if you were to come to me one day and say, Dennis, for some weird reason I'm getting drained every night, or I just can't do what I used to do anymore and all that thing. And I'd say, well, once we cancel out health problems, you got to look at what spiritual aspects going on here, That's the way these things. I had a case one time where a Mama Loa, a female voodoo evoker, actually sicked a vampire spirit on this woman. And I like this woman. And just because simply she didn't like her, she was a next door neighbor. Watch out for your neighbors, okay? You never know what's going to move in your neighborhood, all right? And that happened with her, and that was one of the most interesting cases I ever had. I actually had another paranormal team call me in on that. So we don't know anything about voodoo, so we were told to call you about it, So that was an interesting case. So you have different ways that these things can attack you, but that's just one thing of the undead that's out there. There are other types of undead spirits and things that were on the darkness out there. Another one that comes to mind, and I know you're very familiar with it, is the Wendigo. I have hunted Wendigo, and believe me, that's not a good idea to hunt them. Okay, the only reason I was hunting them, and most of the time when I'm hunting something like that, it's because I've been asked to do it. It's on somebody's property or something. I've had people come up to me over the years and say, "Oh, did you go out and hunt a werewolf last weekend?" I said, "No, not unless I have to." somebody wants me to go look for it, or it's on their property or something, yeah, I will do that. So I have actually, had people come to me and say, "Hey, you need to come check my farm out or my thing. I got a Wendigo out here." I said, "Well, that's interesting. I want to find out about that." But it would not be a good idea for you or anybody to go out in the woods looking for a Wendigo because it might find you.
Oh my gosh, no.
Yeah. And that's the risk you run when it comes to monster. I've told this to a lot of so-called monster hunters. If you're gonna be a monster hunter, you better have a good plan in mind. If you find the monster, what are you gonna do?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you better know what to do, and that's why you better know your monster. Okay, because don't hunt it without knowing it first. That thing that goes with Bigfoot, that goes with Dog Man. I don't care what you're looking for. Giant spiders, giant snakes. You better know what you're looking for. Okay. And I've even looked for giant snakes and giant spiders. I've had giant spiders again. There's a right offhand, right quick. There's a Native American reference to spider women, the women that turn into spiders, giant spiders. So you never know what you're going to be asked to hunt or look for, but you need to know, you need to understand and go study and understand and research what it is you're looking for before you go looking. Okay, that's the main thing there, because you might find it. But the Wendigo you would not want to find, because it is a very dark spirit. It is it would launch a very, very bad spiritual attack against you if you found it. But I want to say something about this right quick. Here's Hollywood again. Forget about that stupid thing of them walking around with deer antlers. No, they do not look like that. A Wendigo does not look like that at all. That's something Hollywood invented. It looks more or less like a zombie, only a giant looking zombie, supposedly. It's emancipated, it's hand flesh on it, it's terrible looking. What it symbolizes for the Native Americans was death from a long, cold, dark, hungry winter. That's what it is, the winter of the soul, the darkness of the soul. And that's what it symbolizes. You don't usually see it, but if you do perceive it, if you're like a medicine man or something like that along those lines, you're in touch with it, you might be catching a glimpse of the Wendigo as the actual form of it. But most of the time, you don't see it, and that's what's so downright dangerous about it. You don't see it until it gets you, or until it gets a hold of you. And that's why they were so much set against people going out looking for Wendigo. They didn't even want to talk about it. Like the Skinwalker, and I run into the Skinwalker. I had an interesting experience with two Cherokee Skinwalker sisters one night up in the mountains. You don't want to talk about these things because you get it attention. It might come looking for you. You might move into your house. Okay, that's why they don't want to mention them. And that's the big taboo thing. You don't talk about it. You don't look for it. So you never would have heard any Native American say, "Well, I'll see you later, Uncle Charlie. I'm going to go look for a Wendigo." No, they wouldn't do that. But this thing, if it overtakes you, here's the bad thing about the Wendigo. It can not only unalive you and eat you up, and it has an insatiable hunger that it can never feel. It could eat a whole town and still be hungry, supposedly. Okay. What the bad thing about the Wendigo is it can eat your soul. It can take possession of you and turn you into a Wendigo and have you eat people. That's the bad thing about it. So its influence goes past just eating you up. It goes over into taking you completely, mind, body, and soul, into itself and turning you into what it is. Very much also like the Rougarou, which I consider another undead type thing. The Rougarou gets confused a lot with a werewolf and is very similar. I would say it is a kind of werewolf, but it's coming from another different direction. You can get it by not being a good Catholic or not going to church or to honoring Lent. You can get it by being an evil, there you go again, a very evil, mean, vindictive person. You may have the Rougarou spirit take you over and turn you into a Rougarou for the next 100 days. They believe it's like 100 days that this thing can do this to you and turn you into a Rougarou. You'll be out in the swamps unaliving people and doing mean, evil Rougarou stuff as you're supposed to do. That's another thing, but it turns you into it puts you, and we got to understand what that term undead means. Undead means you're in a liminal place. Liminal means an in between,
Mhm.
living and dead. You don't belong either to the living or really truly to the dead. You're undead. And when you deal with something like that, you're dealing with a whole different ball game altogether, because it's not coming from any direction that you will know, from the dead or the living. It's coming from a different place altogether. And there can be liminal places, there can be liminal situations, and there can be liminal beings. And these in between things may be coming from other dimensions and places like that that we don't know. But you're dealing with something that is way out of your range because you are a physical being. And you have to understand that and be very careful when it comes to the undead.
Yeah, definitely. For sure. I feel like people sometimes don't take it seriously enough what you can be subjecting yourself to unknowingly.
Oh yeah,
You,
absolutely. And you've got to be ready spiritually for these types of things.
Mhm.
That's why, because you're dealing with spiritual type things, you've got to take it that way. It's just like I used to ask people, you don't go, to McDonald's and order spaghetti.
Yeah, yeah.
That's Olive Garden. Okay. You're dealing with different things here. Okay.
Mhm.
And so you've got to be careful how you approach this stuff. And like I said, that's where this research and learning and experience comes in at. Experience is the best teacher. The more out in the field experience you have, the better you are. I don't care if you're just even listening to bird calls in the park. That's still research.
Mhm.
But you're in the field doing it. That's giving you experience. And I have had experience that have taught me. I've learned the hard way sometimes, but still I survived to take something away from it. My grandmother used to tell me something's always stuck with me down through the years. Bad things are going to happen.
Mhm.
Okay, that's life. It rains on the just and the unjust alike. Okay.
Mhm.
I've had people asking that question over here. Why did this happen to me? I'm a good person. Bad things happen to everybody. Okay.
Mhm.
And my grandmother said, when bad things happen, at least you can try to take something good away from it.
Mhm.
Learn a lesson out of it.
Mhm.
And we
Yeah.
need to do that. We need to be always constantly learning and taking stuff out of this that whether they be good or bad encounters. We need to learn from that and say, okay. I had a teacher, and our teachers shape us, greatly when we were young. She had me something, and something that's always stuck with me my whole life. And this is it. This is what she said. Now that you know this, whatever it is that you learned, now that you know this, you must now apply it. And that's very important. You got to apply it when you know it.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
What are some things that researchers can do to protect themselves from negative entities?
Well, when you deal with negative stuff, definitely prayer is one of them if you are
Mhm.
religious minded. You can wear religious, symbols that you want to do, like blessed objects. That's good. There's certain things you can anoint. I tell people you can anoint yourself with holy water before you go to a certain thing and come out. I tell you, I had an interesting thing happen to me one time, just to illustrate a point. I pulled up at a place that I knew was absolutely demon infested. Okay,
Mm.
and I've dealt a lot with demonology over the years, and it is another completely wild area of the paranormal. But I pulled up at this place, and I was getting ready to get out of my car, get out of my truck while I was there, and before I could open the door, I felt my arm burn. I looked down, and there's like 3 scratches on my arm. Well, that was sort of a sign to me that whatever was there was saying, "Oh, we're waiting on you." Okay.
Mhm. Mm.
So I got the holy water, and I poured it. I put it on there, and I said, "Look," I spoke before I got out of the truck. I said, "Look, I'm coming here to do what I got to do, and you're not stopping me." Okay.
Mhm.
Now I didn't turn down and run. That's what they wanted me to do. You have to confront these things. I like bullies and stand up to them. and then that empowers you against them. You got to remember that empowers you. Okay. And like an hour or so later, I look down and those marks are gone.
Oh.
That's
Yep.
what but that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to psych me out. And a lot of these things try to psych you out. So that's a very important thing as researchers. We got to remember, whatever it is, whether it be demons, whatever, cryptids, it's your frame of mind that you're going into this. This very important. Okay, you got to be ready psychically, intelligent wise. You got to feel it in your heart, your brain, your mind, your body, and your soul. You got to get everything in balance. Okay? If something's out of balance, let me tell you this. If you're going out, Barbara, tomorrow to hunt Bigfoot, and you say, I don't feel good today, I'm off, I would say, Barbara, you might ought to stay home.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Even if it's not Bigfoot doesn't attack you psychically, you're still vulnerable.
Yes. Yeah.
And something could happen. So it might be a good idea to recognize that, A lot of these
Definitely.
things that you come up against, especially if it's demonic in that respect, are looking for that chink in your armor. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You have to
Yeah.
always keep your armor strong. That's what makes you a good one. I've said this to a lot of people over the years, and it's very true. Evil, in whatever form or shape it may take, wants you as a victim. It wants to keep you as a victim because it really fears you as a warrior. Okay. And that's why you got to be a warrior. 99.9% of the time. Okay. You got to keep your armor in check. You got to keep your mindset where it needs to be. You got to be ready spiritually. And you do this by thinking positive things, by touching that inner peace that you need. This strengthens you. And if you believe in a higher power, prayer is another thing that's going along with that. Faith is the main thing. I once wrote, our armor is important. The armor of light is important, but faith is what fuels that armor. Okay, in many instances, iron is good against mean and evil fairies and stuff. Silver against werewolves, steel against men. But faith is the greatest weapon of all. Faith is the greatest weapon of all because it empowers you to be able to stand against these things. And so you need this in place, whatever it is you're going to research, whether it be demons, whether it be cryptids, whether it be whatever the situation. You better have it in place because that's a very good safeguard for you. It's just like Star Trek, putting the shields up on the Enterprise. Have your shields at 100%.
Yes.
Because a lot of these things are looking for that 1% they can exploit. So you have to be very careful. But yeah, and we do run the risk of that as researchers, investigative researchers out in the field. I like to call them on the boots ground research. You run that risk. You got to understand that because a lot of these things may be looking for you that way. It's like I said, if you're going to find Bigfoot or Dogman, pray to God you don't find him on his bad day.
Yeah.
Because you might have a problem.
For sure.
Yeah. But especially when you go looking for things like undead things. The undead, because they can be very spiritual, very bad and juju, okay, spirit wise. And you have to be ready for it, and no matter what you may run into. And that brings us to another one of mine. And when I first started this out years ago, the ripe old age of about 12 years old, when I really began researching all of this stuff, one of the first things I hit on back in the day, and I know Barbara knows about this. Back in the day, we didn't have it. We didn't have the internet. Okay, we didn't have this is great stuff here. You got the libraries of the world at your fingertips.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I haunted libraries for many years. I would haunt the reference room, the libraries, and you couldn't bring the books home. You had to read, and you had to read them there. You had to make notes if you wanted anything. Now, what was great, I was telling somebody this the other day. It was really great when we first got those little micro cassette recorders. Remember those? We could say I could record it in, and But one of the very first things I ever researched, it really got me, was the zombie. The zombies are fascinating. And I want to stop right here for you guys and say, hey, we got to throw the Hollywood zombie out the door here, okay? Kick his butt out of this conversation because he don't belong here. That's the Hollywood filter. Forget about that. That ain't the real zombie, okay? That's something else. That was invented back in that movie Night of the Living Dead, okay? And by the way, you watch that movie this day. I used to watch it with my girlfriend years ago. You watch that movie to this day, you never hear one single time they call those things zombies. They call them ghouls. That's
Yes.
what they were. They weren't zombies. Zombies is a different animal altogether. And we're going to talk about the zombie. Now, the zombie, there's two kinds of zombies here. Okay. There is a undead zombie, a real undead zombie, and then there's a human zombie. He's not dead. Okay. Now, the Bokor will take his victim and give him this concoction. And part of it's like the blowfish poison and some other things. A mixture. You know, the government knows about this, by the way. They went and studied this. Okay. The Bokor knows what he's doing. He can mix this stuff up and make it look okay. Let's say he gives it to you, Barbara. You look like you die. Oh, Barbara's dead. We got a bird. Okay. And they didn't check that, especially in places like Haiti and Jamaica. They weren't big on medical stuff here. Okay. And if you didn't look like you were breathing, and your eyes wasn't moving, they would probably think, "Well, Barbara's dead. We need to bury her." So they don't bury you the next day. They don't embalm you. They just bury you. Okay, that's the way they used to do things. Okay.
Yes.
Bokor knows all about this because he's put you in that position. He's giving you that bulletin and make it look like you're dead. The breathing is slowed now. The eye movement is gone. You look dead. You even look it. I mean, the pallor and everything, but you're not really dead. There's still a spark left in you. The Bokor knows this. Everybody else don't. They think you're gone. They'll put you under, and in a day or two, he's going to come back and dig you up in the dark of the night. He's going to dig you up and administer the antidote and bring you back. Okay, now let me stop and say something right here. It's very important that you understand this. Only Almighty God is the only one in this universe that can bring you back from the dead. Nobody else can do that. No other force can actually do that way. Actually bring you back from the dead. The only one is God can do that. But in the Bokor's got everybody believing this, okay? It looks like you're dead. He administers that, but he brings you back, but he never brings you out of that stupor completely. You're under his complete control. He motivates you. He runs your motor instincts. You are his slave from now on. They used to work you out in the sugar fields from sun up to sundown, and they would feed you. And here's another thing. Here's the interesting thing. I'll tell you this story about this. They cannot, if you are in a zombie like this now, this is not really, you're not really dead, but you might as well be almost dead, okay? Because that's what condition you're in. They will feed you, keep you alive. They got to give you, you're still living, you understand? But this is a human zombie. They will feed you the most bland food possible and then give you water and keep you alive. They just enough to keep you alive so they can work you out in the cane fields, okay? That's what it's all about. This is a form of slavery. That's what it was. Okay. They cannot, under any condition, let salt, any kind of salt, pass your lips as that zombie because it will bring you out of that state.
Wow.
And they know this, okay? So they don't let. And here's the story about this. Somehow or another, this guy, his name was Willie, he got some salt and he come out of it. And come to himself, said, "Where am I at? What am I doing here?" And he said, "I'm going back home." And he went back home. He knocked on his sister's door. She come to the door, screamed and passed out. Willie come back from the dead. He stand outside, and he said, what do you mean I'm coming back from the dead? She said, "We buried you 2 years ago. What are you doing here?" And this is a real story now. This really happened.
Wow.
This is on the record, okay? He said, "What? I've been a zombie for 2 years. I didn't even know it." But he was never dead. He was never really, really dead. But there is another kind of zombie that is dead. Now that's the one that this is a real undead zombie. Is that what we talked about earlier about the vampire? The reanimated, the demonically reanimated corpse. It's a walking dead person with a demon in it. He's using that body like a Uber. It's not out looking to eat brains, okay? That's not what zombies do. That's ghouls. We'll talk about ghouls in a minute. He's a zombie, but they can use this is dark necromancy we're talking about here. Okay. You ever heard that word necromancy?
Yes.
Dead magic, magic of the dead. They do certain things with properties. Let me tell you a quick story about that. And this happened back when Katrina hit New Orleans years ago. They were a team assigned to go from house to house looking for dead bodies. That's a bad job, I know, but somebody had to do it. Okay. They were going from house to house looking for dead bodies, and they had a can of red spray paint, and they would paint on the outside of the house how many bodies, 1, 2, 3, were inside. So they come to this one house, and he said, we knew this was the house of a Bokor or something, of a Mama Loa or a Papa Loa, because there was like a bundle of chicken claws hanging on the door. And by the way, that's supposed to keep evil spirits away. Okay. They was hanging out there, on the front porch and chicken feathers. Now they knew it was a voodoo house. So we went in, we're looking around, and in the back room, on one wall, chained to the wall, was a dead body. And he said, this person was dead. I mean, there was no guts left to hang out of. It was dead. Okay? Without a doubt. So we were standing there looking and said, what are we going to do about this? This is wild. Look at this, And so while they were standing there, the thing raised his head up and laughed at him.
Oh my gosh.
They said they never remembered leaving that house, okay? They got out, died so quick. They got out of there. He said, they marked 1 on the outside of that house. And he said, what are we going to do? He said, let somebody else worry about it. I'm not going back in that house.
Yeah.
But that was not a person. That was not a live person. That was a demonic spirit. And the body's still there, okay? The demons want to inhabit bodies. And that's where necromancy comes in, bringing them and drawing them into a dead body and getting them to reanimate that. I won't go into that. That's a lot of black magic, but that's the way these things work. And this stuff is real.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
This stuff is, this is not Hollywood, okay? This is real. They can do this. They can do this. And here's another thing, another part of necromancy. We could have you lay on that dead, okay? And I can administer certain things to you, do certain rituals around you that you will speak to me.
Oh my gosh.
And answer questions for me. This is another, but there's a demon spirit coming through you doing that. And it's activating your vocal cords and using them to talk to you. Okay. That's necromancy too. So there's different types of necromancy. I just want to explain that to you. You do different rituals. Also, it's having sex with the dead and doing some other stuff that you want to talk about. But anyway, that's what a lot of that stuff goes into. And that is some of the darkest black magic you could ever run into. Okay. That is bad juju stuff. And I've had people come to me, talk to me about that. So, oh, no, we don't need to go there. Okay. That is bad, dark demonic stuff. And it can, stuff like that. If you dabble in it or mess around with it, even read too much about it, become obsessed with it. I've had people come to me over the years, you tell me about this demon, tell me about that demon, tell me about that. I say, look, maybe you're a little bit too much obsessed with this. That's not a good idea.
Yes.
Because these things, that's why, we have a rule in demonology. You don't speak demons' names. You know, the old saying, speak of the devil and he will appear. That's true. You get his attention. You don't want to do that. There's certain things, especially the undead, you do not want to get their attention. And things like ghouls that will eat you. Okay? The ghoul is a demon. There's 2 kinds of ghouls. There's a human ghoul and the demonic ghoul. Either one. And we've seen some, like John Wayne Gacy, with a human ghoul. Okay? They like to eat people. Not only have sex with them, and then they eat them. Okay, that's the way. And, and it's been a taboo down through the civilizations and folklore and history and culture of our world. You just don't eat your neighbor. You don't eat your buddy, okay? Hey, that's a big no-no. But these things cross that line, okay? Ghouls do it, Wendigo do it, Rookaroos do it, werewolves do it. The list goes on and on. They're eating people. That's a big no-no there. God doesn't like that, by the way. God says, you don't do that. Okay. Because that is actually the biggest insult to God, that you actually eat his creation like that.
Oh, wow.
That is the ultimate insult. But anyway, as a minister, I've been asked about that many times. That you need to understand the spiritual aspects of these things and where the heck they're coming from against you, and what their motivations are behind the things that they do. But the ghoul, by the word, is an Arabic word. It means demon, and they're supposed to be the offspring of Lilith, the first wife of Adam, and all that. Supposedly, I won't get into that. That's Jewish folklore. But the interesting thing is that these ghouls and stuff supposedly haunt out of the way places, dark woods, caves, deserts, and areas like that. They run into them eventually, but they do eat people, and also they disinter the recently interred people and eat them. And I thought that was very interesting. You might remember here a while back about that dog man that was seen digging a grave up in the cemetery. I'm gonna say something about Dog Man right quick. And so he's kind of undead in some ways, but not really undead. He's a living thing as well in some ways. But I think a lot of these dog men may have a dark connection. And one of the things that you can do in black magic and dark witchcraft, you can call forth things from the darkness to do things for you. The perfect, you know what? One of the perfect assassins in this world is not John Wick. It's a werewolf. I would not want anyone to stick one of those on me. I'm going to tell you something about the werewolf, my friends. The werewolf is a psychotic killer. He lives and breathes to tear you into pieces and eat you. And once he gets your scent, and I mean that literally, once he gets your smell, once he gets on your trail, he will not stop till he does that. So he's the perfect dark assassin to send after somebody. And a lot of these covens who get into little wars with each other, they send werewolves after each other. Have you ever heard of the Hounds of God? That's supposed to be a secret sect of werewolves that work for the church.
Oh,
But
wow.
I find that very redundant. That you can't use evil to fight evil. That's not a smart idea. Okay, it don't work out usually, but that's what supposedly happens with the Hounds of God. You remember that very famous movie, Silver Bullet? You ever watch that?
Yes.
Silver Bullet. Remember the priest in that? He thought he was doing God's work by unaliving little children.
Yes. Yes.
That's how demented some people can become with it. But that's what happens when you sell your soul to the darkness. It changes you completely. And that's why I tell people, for heaven's sake, and I've seen this happen, do not dabble in this stuff. Don't mess with this stuff. It's one thing to research it and be very careful how you do that. It's another thing to dabble in it, and you don't know. You really don't know. I want to tell you something right now today. I have walked into the darkness far enough to know that I didn't want to go in any further. And I've come back to tell you not to do it either. It's not a good idea, because there are things and forces out there that you can turn loose that will be your ultimate destruction in many ways, and not just your body, but your soul as well. That's the most important part of you is your immortal soul itself. They are enemies of that as well. But that's a lot of the things that are undead out there walking around. They're in that liminal in between space. They're neither heaven or hell, earth or heaven. They're in between. And so you have to deal with them very differently than you would, I think, Bigfoot or something along the same lines, or Chupacabra or whatever it is you're looking for. You got to understand what it is as a monster hunter. If you're going to be a real monster hunter, you got to understand. There are 3 cardinal rules of monster hunting. The number 1 rule is the hunter must never become the hunted. If you're looking for Bigfoot, you don't want to wind up being hunted by him. You want to do the hunting. You don't want to be the hunted. That's the number one rule. And the second rule is you know your quarry, know what it is you're looking for. That's the second major rule. Know all about it. I mean, everything about it. You can find out about it. If I'm looking for unicorns, I want to know all about unicorns. That's number two. Number three is another important one, too. Number three is a monster hunter must never become the monster.
Good point. Yes.
Yep.
Excellent. Dr. Before we wrap this up, I wanted to see if Brian had any questions.
Brian, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No.
Go ahead, buddy.
I'm just sitting here taking this all in. So
Yes.
there's been a couple questions that popped in with the spiritual vampire. Are you talking? Is that it's another spirit possessing the body? But does that taint that person's soul that passed away? How does that? Like you talked about the mother coming back. So is her soul not at rest, or is her soul gone and something else took possession?
I got on my own personal feeling is that, and I didn't say this to the daughter and all that, because I don't like to upset my clients. I try to, play it as, I'm not there to create fear and depress them and all that thing. I try to help them solve their problem, and not be part of the problem. But I felt my own personal self that this woman died demonically possessed. And I've had several instances where I have found out, and that's going to blow your mind. Think about it here, okay? That even death may not free you from the control of these demonic spirits sometimes. I know that's sad to think about, but they can become so much a part of you that even death won't release them from you. And I think that might have been the case with this woman, that she was such bad spiritual state when she died that this had to happen like that, There's been several instances. I think there's a very famous, we were talking about this the other night, that may have been the inspiration. And I had Bram Stoker's nephew on my show one time. We had some great shows. They might have been the inspiration for Dracula, not just Vlad Tepes, who is a national hero in Transylvania, by the way. He's like their George Washington. He's not a vampire. Okay. But we think that Bram Stoker may have heard the story about the Irish vampire who was so evil that when they buried him, when he died, he kept coming back, taking people's blood, and they had a problem. So luckily, they found a vampire hunter, that knew his stuff. Okay, and they went to him and said, "Hey, this guy's coming back, and he's biting everybody. He's doing some terrible things. He's mean and evil guy, and we keep burying him, but he keeps coming back." And so the vampire hunter said, "Well, you're doing this wrong. Bury him upside down, and he won't come back." Okay, and put a rock on him, and that's what they did. And supposedly that solved the problem. But yeah, a lot of times if it's something very much like this, I'm not going to say that her body, although she might, if she did leave a piece of her dress there, I don't know. That's freaky to think about. But I think she was more what we would call an incorporeal type thing. She was more of ethereal than physical. If she were coming back, and she was coming back in, and you can be spiritually attacked in your dreams. I have had that happen. Okay, you can be spiritually attacked in your dreams, but you know what? Here's good news: you can fight that off just as good as you can when you're awake. Okay, if you know how to do it. But I think that's what this was. It was more like a spiritual attack in her dreams, but it had more of a demonic force behind it. And her mother was the cause of that. Yep.
Well, thank you very much for sharing all of this with us tonight, Dr. Carroll. This is just, do you have something else, Brian? Did you?
No, I'm just,
Okay.
I mean, I could go on all night with questions.
I know. It's just, I feel like I want to have another episode of Camp Nightmare Fuel. We'll have to figure out what, along these same lines, but it's not the exact same thing, because it really is such good information that I think, especially,
the more information we have, the more information and all that we have, the more arrows we have in our quiver. That makes us much better hunters, whatever we're looking for, or whatever the situation may be. But Yeah, definitely. Knowledge is power. I have that. I got a little sign on my desk that says that. By the way, knowledge
So,
is power.
yeah, that's
Very
say
true.
that.
Yeah, very true.
So before I let you go, can you just tell our listeners a little bit about where where they can find you, and is there anything coming
Okay,
up?
well, I do 3 shows a week. The first show I do on Monday nights at 9:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with my good friend Carroll Fountain. We do
Yes.
the show called The Road Less Traveled. We kind of do the offbeat stuff that nobody else is covering, so we do that. And then Wednesday nights, I do my main show, Hunting the Shadows. That's on Hunting the Shadows YouTube podcast channel. And that's at 9:00 p.m. Eastern Standard. All my shows are 9:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Okay. And that's on Wednesday nights. And then Friday nights, I do Paranormal Point of View. That's where, like Dacre Stoker, I have interview people about books, or we talk about movies of a paranormal slant with them. And I talk about some of my past cases sometimes on there, that the things that have happened with that and all that. And of course, I have some books available. I've written several books which can be found on Barnes and Noble and Amazon. Just look up the author as Dennis W. Carroll. And also, I have a paranormal consultation service. If for any reason you have any questions, any concerns, you just want to tell me a story of something that happened to you, or you got some kind of demonology problem, or whatever the situation, you need some answers or whatever, you can contact me at denniswcarroll.com. That's my website, and it's free. I don't charge for it. And so we have a lot of consultation. I've consulted with people all over the world over all the years. I've been doing this now for well over half a century, and it never gets old, but I hope I've helped some people along the way. And
That's such
it's been very
amazing.
interesting. And also, if you have any problems, please reach out. It's good that we know that we're not alone in some of this stuff. And that's always been my main goal. It's not just research. Is to offer help and maybe answers for people's questions sometimes. That's another reason I think why we're here. If we can't, help each other out, be there for each other, then what's the point, So that's the way I like to look at it, definitely. But I've enjoyed this. It's a great show. A lot of this stuff is definitely, my friends, nightmare camp fuel.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, it is. I've been in the situation where I had a haunting going on in my home and I didn't know what to do. And it was so, and so I know the helplessness that people can feel and like, feel so alone. So thank you so much for doing that. That's just an incredible service. That's just amazing. Thank you.
I was telling somebody the other day, and what really bugs me, I'm going to give you one of my pet peeves here, okay? What really bugs me is some of these paranormal groups, they're nothing but a bunch of social clubs out there. Okay? That's all they're doing, running around, and they're really giving all of us a bad name as serious researchers, okay? And I don't like that, because they're messing us up in that way, just like AI is messing us up to a great
extent. That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, they're messing us up, and they're going around. Oh, we got scared last week when we screamed, and they're doing all this junk. There's nothing but the feel good stuff. They're adventurers and this kind of thing. That's not helping anybody. That's not accumulating knowledge. That's not answering questions. That's not really doing anything. I like the real serious researchers, people who are doing it for all the right reasons, and not the wrong ones.
Right. All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Carroll and Brian. Thanks for counseling. Yeah, co-camp counseling with me.
Great time. Thank you.
And so this is going to be it for another episode of Camp Nightmare Fuel. Make sure that I'm going to put all of our good. This is not live. I'm going to put all of our website information and all of our links in the final comments. So thank you for joining us, everybody, and have a great night.